Ethan spent over a decade scrimping and sacrificing to buy his own home, only to have his father and entitled sister try to steal it away for their own selfish gain. What started as quiet injustice exploded into a shocking family battle filled with lies, betrayal, and a fight for survival. If you're drawn to stories of resilience and raw truth, please hit subscribe and stay with us. Now, let me take you through Ethan's unforgettable journey. Ethan Parker wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Heck, he wasn't even born with a spoon. More like a pair of worn-out gloves and a stubborn streak that kept him going through the toughest days. You know those people who find their calling early and never look back? That was Ethan with animals. While most kids his age were glued to video games or dreaming about becoming YouTubers, Ethan was sneaking off to pet shelters, spending hours trying to convince a stray dog that he wasn't a threat. Yeah, kinda weird, but honestly, it was his thing. Fast forward a bit, and you'd find Ethan clocking in at the busiest animal hospital in town, where the floors are slippery with more than just disinfectant and the air smells like a mix of wet dog and sheer exhaustion. His job title? Veterinary technician. Fancy, right? What it really means is he's the guy who gets scratched, bitten, and sometimes peed on, daily. If you think dealing with pets is all cute and cuddly, think again. There are nights when he's stitching up a German shepherd who swallowed a tennis ball, or calming down a terrified cat who's convinced every human is out to get it. The hours are brutal, the pay isn't glamorous, Ethan's pulling in about $65,000 a year, but man, when you see a pup wag its tail after you save its life, it's worth every scraped knuckle and sleepless night. But here's where reality bites harder than a pit bull. Saving up for a house on that salary? Good luck. Ethan's been living like a broke college student well into his late 20s, rooming with 3 guys who all seem to have side hustles of questionable legality, don't ask about the smell, driving a car that sounded like it was one pothole away from retirement, and eating enough ramen to open his own noodle shop. His budget meals looked like sad science experiments, yesterday's frozen burrito mixed with canned beans and whatever was on sale at the grocery store. Still, through all that chaos, Ethan kept one thing sacred, his house fund. While his sister Brooke was busy living her best, influencer mom life, complete with designer bags, endless business retreats, and a constant stream of blessed mama Instagram posts, Ethan was hustling in the background. Every overtime shift, every extra weekend on call, every dollar he didn't spend on lattes or nights out went straight into that savings account. It wasn't about bragging rights or keeping up with the Joneses, it was about finally having a place to call his own, a fortress built on grit and sweat instead of handouts. If you thought family dinners were awkward, Ethan's family was practically a masterclass in dysfunction. Picture this, 3 main characters starring in a long-running drama that somehow never got old for his sister Brooke and his dad Richard, though Ethan wished he could change the channel. Brooke was the dazzling star of the show, a walking, talking highlight reel of entitlement and Instagram filters. Richard, their father, played the ever-generous producer, throwing money at problems like he had a never-ending budget. And Ethan? Well, he was the one stuck with the script that nobody wanted to read aloud. Richard Parker was a man who clearly believed in different strokes for different folks, but somehow his favorite stroke was reserved exclusively for Brooke. It wasn't subtle either, this favoritism was as blatant as a neon sign. Need a new laptop? Sorry, son, that's not in the budget. Want a pair of shoes for school? Money doesn't grow on trees. But Brooke wanted the latest MacBook. Richard's credit card magically materialized faster than you could say, Daddy's princess. She wanted a luxury car. Boom, the keys appeared, financed with the kind of interest rates that made Ethan's stomach turn. Every time Brooke stumbled, whether it was a failed business, a boyfriend who vanished with her money, or some sketchy MLM scheme, Richard was there, throwing a lifeline woven from his company credit cards and empty promises. Brooke's life was a whirlwind of hustles and business ventures, at least that's what she called them on social media. To Ethan's growing disbelief, Brooke had somehow built a career out of selling things no one needed, mystical crystals, alkaline water that promised to cure every ailment except maybe common sense, and motivational videos filmed in sparkling spas paid for by Richard's corporate accounts. She had perfected the art of the hustle, if by hustle you meant jumping from one pyramid scheme to another, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and disappointed investors, mostly her parents. Her Instagram was a curated kingdom of matching family outfits, staged, blessed mama photo shoots, and sponsored posts promoting products she probably never used. Yet behind the glossy veneer was a relentless demand for handouts, attention, and permission to play the victim. Brooke's children, 3 adorable but bewildered little humans, were often pawns in this game, a prop for content creation one minute, a reason for financial rescue the next. Her constant mantra was, "raising my tribe," but the tribe itself was often left in the care of grandparents while she chased the next viral video or business pitch. Ethan, meanwhile, was the reluctant audience to this spectacle, sitting quietly in the back of the theater, watching the spotlight shine elsewhere. He had learned early on that arguing with Richard was like throwing pebbles at a hurricane, and confronting Brooke usually meant getting caught in a whirlwind of emotional theatrics. So, instead of fighting battles he couldn't win, Ethan focused on his own stage, the animal hospital, the budget spreadsheets, the house fund that grew with slow, steady increments. His silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Each time Brooke flaunted a new designer bag or posted yet another retreat in Cancun, Ethan reminded himself why he chose his path, a humble, honest grind away from the chaos. He told himself that one day, his work ethic and discipline would pay off in a way that no Instagram follower count ever could. His patience was both shield and sword, guarding him from bitterness while cutting through the noise of family drama. But make no mistake, beneath that calm exterior simmered a growing frustration. Watching a lifetime of hard work dismissed or ignored, seeing his father repeatedly throw resources at Brooke's mistakes while expecting Ethan to be reasonable felt like carrying a weight that got heavier every year. It was a delicate dance, balancing love, disappointment, and the quiet hope that someday the scales would tip in his favor. Little did Ethan know, the reckoning was coming, and it would demand everything he had to stand his ground. Ethan's dream of owning a home wasn't born overnight, it was forged in the slow grind of nearly 10 years of relentless saving and sacrifice. Unlike those lucky enough to inherit wealth or get a helping hand, Ethan had to become his own financial architect, piecing together knowledge about mortgages, property taxes, and home repairs like an apprentice studying an ancient craft. Nights were often spent poring over online forums, watching YouTube tutorials on fixing leaky faucets or painting walls without turning the house into a disaster zone. He wasn't just saving money, he was preparing himself to be the sole caretaker of a space he could finally call his own. His budget was so tight, it could have won an Olympic gold medal for austerity. Ethan lived on a diet of calculated frugality, buying only what was absolutely necessary, scouting thrift stores for furniture, and learning to differentiate between needs and wants the hard way. That extra shift at the clinic? It wasn't just for the paycheck, it was for the down payment. That skipped night out with friends wasn't boredom, it was discipline. While his colleagues splurged on trendy dinners or weekend getaways, Ethan was carefully funneling every spare dollar into his house fund, understanding that his independence depended on it. Contrast this with Brooke's life, a revolving door of flashy spending and financial gambles, all cushioned by their father's seemingly endless credit lines. Every failed business venture she launched was patched up with another bailout. Expensive vacations, designer wardrobes, luxury cars, none of it earned, all of it borrowed or gifted. The stark difference between the siblings wasn't lost on Ethan, but rather than spark jealousy, it fueled his determination. Where Brooke's empire was built on shaky sand, Ethan's foundation was slow and steady, grounded in reality. The day Ethan finally held the keys to his very own 3-bedroom ranch-style house, it felt surreal. The house was far from perfect, an outdated bathroom carpet that smelled faintly of mystery, neon orange kitchen walls that screamed for mercy, and walls that carried the stories of decades. But it was his. Every squeak of the floorboards, every chipped paint spot, was a reminder of battles fought and won. He didn't need a mansion or a luxury condo, he needed a home, and this was it. Sitting on the cold, empty floor of the living room that first evening, Ethan let the tears come, silent, slow, and deep. Those tears weren't about sadness, they were the release of years spent scrimping, working doubles, missing out on life's little pleasures. They were a testament to a hard-won independence, to proving to himself that grit and perseverance could carve out a place in a world that seemed designed to keep him small. For once, the house wasn't just 4 walls and a roof, it was the tangible proof that Ethan's sacrifice had a purpose, that his dream wasn't just a fantasy whispered in the dark but a reality he had earned with blood, sweat, and patience. 5 years before Ethan finally clutched those worn keys to his modest ranch, his sister Brooke had been handed a very different kind of prize, a sprawling, gleaming house nestled in one of the fanciest neighborhoods around. This wasn't just any house. It was the kind of place where the lawns were manicured to perfection, security systems flashed bright warning signs, and Teslas glided silently down the streets like they owned the road. A 4-bedroom dream with vaulted ceilings and enough square footage to host a small festival, Brooke's new home was a far cry from Ethan's cramped apartment or even his future humble abode. Now, to her credit, Brooke did briefly try the homeowner thing, at least in Instagram stories. Champagne-popping poolside selfies, perfectly staged, morning coffee with a view shots, and countless clips hyping up her empire. But behind the filters and hashtags, reality moved at a far less glamorous pace. Where Ethan built his future brick by brick, Brooke demolished hers with a series of spectacular missteps. First came the boyfriend, Jackson, whose music career was the big break everyone was betting on. Richard poured tens of thousands into studio time, marketing, and what Ethan privately called the mixtape that never dropped. Within weeks, Jackson vanished, off to Miami, chasing dreams, or whatever, and leaving behind an empty bank account and a mountain of unpaid bills. Brooke's business ventures weren't any steadier. Like a gambler chasing the next win, she jumped headfirst into pyramid schemes, crystal healing empires, and alkaline ionized water that promised to change lives but mostly drained wallets. Money flowed out faster than it came in, thanks largely to a father who was too eager to shield her from consequences. Designer bags, spa days, private school tuition for her kids, all were paid without hesitation, as if the family fortune was an endless river. But then came the inevitable crash. Brooke, stripped of the house she never fully cared for, moved back into the parental guest house, though moved back might be a generous term for someone who treated the space like a 5-star hotel with none of the responsibility. She maintained her routine of lavish spending, social media posting, and business pivoting, all while leaning heavily on Richard's continued generosity. Ethan watched this cycle with a frustration that simmered beneath his calm surface, growing hotter each time Brooke launched another doomed venture or flaunted her latest designer haul. It wasn't just jealousy, it was the sting of injustice, the nagging sense that while he had clawed and scraped for every dollar, Brooke seemed to live on borrowed time, energy, and money. Every bailout, every handout, was a reminder that the playing field wasn't level, and maybe never would be. That sense of unfairness wrapped around Ethan like a tightening noose, fueling a quiet but relentless fire that would soon demand a reckoning. Because while Brooke's world seemed a series of revolving doors between luxury and crisis, Ethan's life was about to confront a challenge far more personal, and far less forgiving. The day Richard and Brooke showed up unannounced at Ethan's modest little sanctuary felt less like a family visit and more like an invasion force rolling in with all the subtlety of a parade. First came Richard, stepping out of his sleek black Mercedes, the one Ethan knew was a family car, but only Brooke ever actually drove. Moments later, Brooke herself made an entrance that seemed to scream, "I belong in a magazine, not a rental," as she slid out of a gleaming Range Rover sporting red-soled Louboutins that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly mortgage payment. Ethan watched from behind his front window, his stomach twisting in that familiar knot, the one that tightened every time he faced a reminder that, in this family, the scales were as crooked as the neon orange kitchen walls he'd painstakingly painted over. Brooke didn't even try to hide her disdain. "Ugh, this furniture is so basic," she scoffed loudly, her eyes flitting across the room as if she were critiquing a discount store catalog. "And these walls? Beige? That's just so uninspired." She swirled her phone around, filming every detail for her Instagram story, as if Ethan's hard-earned home was just another backdrop for her content creation. Then came Richard's voice, the kind that had put Ethan in his place more times than he could count, all wrapped up in a veneer of calm business reasoning. "Son, Brooke's been going through a rough patch lately," he began, his tone like a seasoned lawyer trying to sell a dodgy product. "We've been thinking about family stability. Your sister has 3 growing children who need space to thrive. This house of yours, it's really too big for just one person." Ethan blinked. Did he hear that right? His heart hammered against his ribs, confusion mixing with rising anger. "You want me to give my house to Brooke?" The words tasted bitter on his tongue. Brooke chimed in, ever the prima donna, waving a manicured hand without breaking her Instagram live. "I need a proper space for my content creation," she declared. "The guesthouse lighting totally kills my engagement metrics. You wouldn't understand." And there it was, the crushing weight of years of silent sacrifice, of watching his hard work dismissed like yesterday's trends, now boiled down to not understanding the importance of social media aesthetics. Ethan's mind raced, disbelief clashing with a fury he'd carefully buried. How could they reduce his home, his sanctuary built on a decade of discipline, to mere space for Brooke's online vanity? The unfairness wasn't new, but this brazen demand was a slap that left him staggering. In that moment, Ethan felt the walls closing in, not just the beige ones Brooke loathed, but the emotional walls built from years of favoritism, excuses, and broken promises. The steady resolve that had carried him this far trembled as anger bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. He wasn't just facing a request, he was confronting the legacy of neglect disguised as family support, the toxic entitlement that had shadowed his every step. But Ethan wasn't ready to give up, not this time. The battle lines were drawn, and beneath the calm exterior, a storm was gathering, fueled by every sacrifice ignored and every moment he'd been told to be reasonable. The fight for his home, and for his dignity, was about to begin. The room fell heavy with silence after Richard's thinly veiled demand. Then, as if dropping the mic wasn't enough, he leaned in, voice low but sharp, and said the one thing Ethan never expected to hear: "Son, if you don't help Brooke here, you might want to reconsider your position in the will." The words hung in the air, a brutal mix of threat and manipulation wrapped in the guise of family concern. Ethan's heart clenched, not just at the idea of losing a future he had no real claim to yet, but at the sheer coldness of a father willing to wield inheritance like a weapon. Years of biting back frustration, swallowing his pride, and playing the good son role were colliding with a surge of something fierce and raw. For so long, Ethan had kept his mouth shut, hoping that patience and hard work would be enough to carve out his place without burning bridges. But this was a reckoning. The weight of silence that once protected him now felt like chains tightening with every breath. He realized the time for quiet endurance had passed. Calmly, he rose and reached for a folder he'd prepared years ago, an arsenal of truth meticulously collected and preserved, like receipts of broken promises and reckless indulgences. This wasn't just paperwork. It was the story of Brooke's endless financial disasters, the bailouts from Richard, and the lies that had been brushed under the rug for too long. Each page told of a business that imploded, a boyfriend who vanished with cash, and the luxury splurges that Richard happily bankrolled. Brooke's face, once so smug and assured, twisted as Ethan spread the documents across the coffee table. Her usual performance faltered, the rehearsed gasps and dramatic eye rolls replaced by a flicker of panic. "You're being so dramatic," she snapped, trying to reclaim control. "This isn't how family talks to each other. You're trying to tear us apart." But Ethan wasn't swayed by her theatrical deflections or the practiced victimhood she wore like armor. He saw through the charade, the gaslighting, the self-pity, the desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative. This was no longer about peace or family, it was about standing up to the betrayal that had been years in the making. In that charged moment, the fragile illusion of harmony shattered. Ethan's quiet courage faced off against entitlement and manipulation, setting the stage for a battle that neither side could afford to lose. The moment Ethan began pulling out the papers, the air in the room shifted, thickened with tension and the weight of truths long ignored. It wasn't some haphazard collection tossed on the table, this was a carefully curated dossier, a decade's worth of silent observation and careful record-keeping that told a story far darker than any Instagram highlight reel Brooke flaunted. First, Ethan laid down the property records. The house Brooke had been handed, valued at $875,000 when the family gifted it to her. Not some modest starter home, this was prime real estate in a neighborhood that screamed success. Then came the sale price, $890,000. Barely enough to cover fees and taxes, with a thin slice of profit that vanished into thin air. And where did that money go? Ethan flipped through the pages like a judge revealing the case. $50,000 flushed into Jackson's, promising a music career, a career that evaporated faster than smoke, leaving only empty studio invoices behind. Then, $200,000 sunk into a crystal healing empire that crashed spectacularly in 3 months, leaving behind nothing but dusty rocks and broken dreams. Oh, and how could he forget the $300,000 funneled into a pyramid scheme hawking alkaline water with magical claims that defied both science and common sense? The list went on: luxury bags charging up credit cards that should have been cut off years ago, spa treatments that Richard paid for while Ethan patched his old sneakers, private school tuition for Brooke's kids, and the shining symbol of irresponsibility, a Range Rover that Brooke certainly couldn't afford without Daddy's deep pockets. Richard's confident, smooth demeanor cracked as he scanned the papers, his eyes flickering from numbers to receipts to bank statements. The carefully constructed world he had built to protect his daughter was crumbling, piece by painful piece. You could almost see the mental gears grinding as he faced the undeniable truth that these weren't just missteps, they were a reckless pattern enabled by him. Brooke's usual bravado faltered. Her rehearsed smiles and sharp retorts lost their edge, replaced by a flicker of panic and defensiveness. She flailed with half-hearted gaslighting, accusing Ethan of being dramatic, of tearing the family apart. But the evidence was a.s. Ethan sat back, quiet but resolute, holding a calm that contrasted sharply with the storm his revelations had stirred. This wasn't about tearing down his sister, it was about finally pulling back the curtain on years of entitlement and enabling. It was about demanding accountability in a family where debts had been hidden behind expensive facades and excuses. In that charged silence, a new reality settled: Brooke's golden ticket had turned into a noose, and Richard's endless generosity had paved a road to ruin. Ethan wasn't just calling them out, he was claiming his dignity, refusing to let another chapter be written in silence and sacrifice. The day Brooke and Richard decided to make their move on Ethan's home was straight out of a bad reality show, except this was painfully real, and Ethan was the unwilling star. It started early morning, when Ethan was still wiping sleep from his eyes, unaware that the chaos was already barreling down his quiet street. From his window, he spotted the unmistakable sight of a massive U-Haul rolling into his driveway, its back doors flung open like an invading fortress unloading treasure. Next came the shock: Richard directing a locksmith right to Ethan's front door, tools clinking with the ominous promise of changing locks without a hint of legal right. Brooke strutted around like she owned the place, which, as far as she was concerned, she did, ordering movers and filming the whole spectacle for her Instagram audience. The kids ran wild, their gleeful screams filling the yard as if this was some kind of housewarming party rather than an attempted eviction. Ethan's heart plummeted. He knew the papers, the mortgages, the painstaking savings meant nothing to them at this moment. Shock turned quickly into action. He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling but determined, and called his neighbors, pleading for help. "Guys, seriously, there's a moving truck, a locksmith, and my sister's live streaming my eviction. Please, call the cops." While he waited, Brooke slipped seamlessly into the role she knew best, the vulnerable single mother fighting for her children's future. Her voice quivered just enough to tug at the sympathetic strings of anyone watching. "I'm just trying to provide for my babies," she whined on camera, tears apparently glistening though probably rehearsed. "My brother's trying to make us homeless, and it's just so unfair." The performative victimhood was a stark contrast to the chaos she'd unleashed, and Ethan felt the sting of the manipulation more keenly than ever. When the police arrived, the tone shifted swiftly from family drama to cold, hard reality. Officers listened patiently but firmly demanded proof of residence and ownership. Ethan presented his mortgage documents, tax statements, and the deed, all clearly in his name. Brooke and Richard scrambled, producing a jumble of forged papers and dubious agreements that didn't hold water under official scrutiny. The locksmith, caught in the middle, was visibly uncomfortable, admitting he'd been misled about the legality of the job. The officers wasted no time explaining the laws around unlawful eviction and trespassing. Despite Brooke's tearful pleas and social media threats, the police made it clear, this wasn't a soap opera, it was a crime scene. As Ethan stood on his front porch, watching movers pack up the few items Brooke had dared to bring in, a mix of relief and lingering disbelief washed over him. This battle was far from over, but for now, justice had drawn a line in the sand. The house wasn't just his address, it was his hard-earned refuge, and today, the law was finally on his side. The police investigation that followed wasn't just routine paperwork, it unraveled a family drama thicker and darker than anyone expected. As officers dug through the mess Brooke and Richard left behind, the forged documents they tried to pass off as legit quickly unraveled. What had seemed like mere sloppiness was actually full-blown fraud, fake signatures, fabricated stamps, and doctored agreements that screamed desperation and deceit. The locksmith's reluctant testimony confirmed the family's attempts to manufacture legal cover, turning a simple eviction into a criminal case. But the surprises didn't stop there. Brooks' history emerged like a shadow lurking in the background, shoplifting incidents long swept under the rug, scams involving return frauds and phony sponsorships, all part of a pattern that finally caught up with her. It was clear she hadn't just been living off family generosity, she'd been using it to shield a life spiraling out of control. Richard's involvement was perhaps the most stunning revelation. Far from the concerned patriarch, he was exposed as the architect of financial chaos, having embezzled funds from his own company to bankroll Brooks' extravagant lifestyle. The corporate accounts Richard had managed so carefully were a facade for years of fraudulent expenses disguised as consulting fees for Brooks' failing ventures. Legal proceedings began swiftly, with the company pressing charges and the threat of serious jail time looming. Amid the chaos, a bittersweet silver lining emerged for Brooks' children. Custody was transferred to their father, who, unlike Brooke and Richard, had managed to rebuild a stable life. Now married to a child psychologist and living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, he enrolled the kids in therapy and public schools, providing the stability and care they desperately needed but had long been denied. Ethan's home, meanwhile, was no longer just a battleground, it was once again his sanctuary. Repairs were made to erase the chaos left behind by the unauthorized move-in and vandalism. Walls were repainted, locks reinforced, and the neon kitchen replaced with a soothing palette. More than just physical restoration, Ethan found a renewed sense of peace, the hard-won knowledge that his perseverance had preserved more than just property, it had preserved his dignity and his future. Ethan sat alone one evening, the quiet hum of his repaired home wrapping around him like a protective cloak. The past months had peeled back every layer of trust he'd once held for his family, exposing raw wounds of betrayal and abandonment that cut deeper than any physical scar. It was a strange kind of loss, not just of possessions or money, but of the image of a family he'd once hoped would be his refuge. Instead, it had been a crucible that tested every ounce of his resilience. Calls and messages from Brooke came and went, each dripping with apologies as rehearsed as her Instagram performances. She promised change, begged for forgiveness, and dangled the hope of rebuilding the fractured ties. But Ethan saw through the smokescreen, these weren't the words of genuine remorse but desperate attempts to regain control and sympathy. He declined politely but firmly, understanding that some wounds demanded time and boundaries, not rushed reconciliations. In the quiet aftermath, Ethan found solace not in blood ties, but in chosen connections, friends who had stood by him without judgment, colleagues who respected his work, and the animals whose trust and recovery gave his life meaning beyond familial chaos. His work at the animal hospital was more than a job, it was a calling that restored faith in purpose and compassion. It grounded him in a life rebuilt on his own terms, one where integrity outweighed inheritance. Family, Ethan realized, wasn't just about DNA or shared history, it was about loyalty, respect, and the spaces we create for each other to grow. The Parker name carried baggage, sure, but Ethan's story was no longer bound by the past. It was his to write, with a hand steady and heart open, ready for whatever came next. ChatGPT de NOI. Ethan's journey reminds us that true strength comes not from blood ties, but from standing firm in our truth and choosing the family that lifts us up. Through betrayal and hardship, he reclaimed his life with resilience and dignity, showing us all the power of perseverance. If this story moved you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of real, powerful stories like Ethan's. Take care of yourself and stay strong.